systems, specifically ones that are being used to identify individuals or information about individuals, are using personal data, personally identifiable data. And this information is being scraped from public sources or being sold to companies to develop this. And without data protection laws in place, or without enforcement of data protection laws or transparency into what's going on, these systems are being developed without our knowledge of what's being developed. Second is the role of bias. So we talked earlier about data, and humans are the ones that are collecting this data, labeling this data, and using that data to input into the machine to deliver outputs. Okay, the type of data that goes into the AI development is not agnostic. It can be biased, especially if it's data that's been harvested from sources that have historically marginalized groups and only see certain categories of people or things as relevant or non-relevant, or that certain groups of people are more, certain communities have more crime rates, and so they continue to target those communities by inputting data about those historical crime rates into the data system, and then the outputs are going to be replicating the historical injustices, right? So bias and the failure to recognize bias and account for bias in the development of an AI system is a risk. And that's, of course, right to be free of discrimination is being violated there. Designing for predictions, I think there's a lot of interest and popularity in trying to predict the future, and it's very compelling. But again, what are we predicting? We're predicting the future based on the data we know from the past. That's really what's happening. And so if the data from the past is not relevant to the future, or is not an accurate representation of the present, then what kind of future are you predicting? And how useful is that actually? So designing for predictions, it's something that data scientists are quite interested in doing, and I personally get very, it's very off-putting to me when I hear designing for predictions. Also, the explainability of algorithms. Right, the more complex the algorithm, the more complex the AI system, including deep learning techniques, which again, I won't go into the specifics of that, but it's basically the machine is learning on its own without as much human assistance. That's basically what deep learning is. It becomes more difficult for the data scientists, the humans behind the system, to explain exactly how the system is learning and to be able to explain that to the public. And so more thought and effort by data scientists needs to be going into explainable AI. And then finally, the environmental damage that's caused by processing so much data over and over again to keep improving the algorithm. I mean, we're not talking about hundreds of data points. We're talking about millions upon millions of data points here, and sometimes much more. And so these are kind of the development risks. When it comes to adoption and use, again, privacy is at issue, right? Because it's being used to identify people, maybe not even with their knowledge that they're being identified or surveilled. Transparency issues, so knowledge, again, we're not being told that the AI system is being used, how it's being used, and what the impact of that use is. And then accountability and fairness issues. If the AI system causes harm, who is responsible for that harm, and how do we account for that harm, and how is that redressed? And then mission creep. So oftentimes an AI system is developed for one use, and then it's applied in a completely different way just because, this thing's already developed, it makes sense. It could make sense to use it for this other thing, let's do it. But really, the original tool was developed using a certain data set and to perform a certain function. and so applying it in another context could cause significant harm or unintentional consequences. So I'll leave it at that in terms of the risks. One thing we're going to be focusing today on policy in Africa. So I'm not going to talk about the European approach, but one aspect of the European approach to keep in mind is that they're taking a tiered risk approach. So looking at all of the risks that AI could pose, and then categorizing it based on certain metrics of what's a low to minimal risk, what's a medium risk, and what's a high risk system. When we're talking about risk, we're talking about risks to human rights, fundamental freedoms, health, and safety. And so looking at these factors, as well as others that I haven't mentioned, to determine what the risk is and what the policy response should be, because AI is used in so many different ways, including spam filters for your emails, right? You might not need to use the same risk approach or the same governance approach and response to something like that as you would to something like a facial recognition tool. So that's kind of the mindset that the European approach has taken. But of course, they haven't adopted that policy yet, and it's yet to be seen when it'll be adopted and what the impacts will be.
Thank you, Shabnam, for that elaborate look into risks in developing AI and risks in also deploying AI. So next we're going to have Thobekile, and Thobekile is from the Paradigm Initiative, and she will take us through national strategies for AI and some of the considerations. Welcome, Thobekile.
All right, thank you so much, and thank you, Shabnam, for laying that foundation. So I'm just going to, if you don't mind. So I'll address national strategies from the perspective that where we are as a continent in Africa, we are developing in terms of how we are making use of digital technologies, and we are also developing in terms of the use and application by national strategy that kind of project to as far as the end of the room. So I was just battling with the concept of what artificial intelligence actually is. So we need to actually have a framework that addresses how we use and apply AI across different functions within our countries. And unfortunately, from that perspective in Africa, we do not actually have a country that has nailed it and said, okay, we've got a comprehensive one-stop shop strategy that addresses the use and application of AI in Africa. I've researched a lot about AI national strategies, and particularly focused on South Africa with the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Digital Policy. And one of the key findings from my research is that there are a number of other actors who put out reports and talk about how countries like Rwanda, countries like Mauritius have comprehensive national strategies. But in all honesty, when we're looking at a one-stop shop national strategy that addresses the use and application of AI, we are still lagging behind, because what we find are fragmented, pieces of, strategies that are being deployed across the different countries, and the strategies are not necessarily a one-stop policy document, but actually span across policy and actual practice. What do I mean by that? When we're looking at, for instance, Rwanda has, developed, for instance, now, a data protection law, but in all honesty, they actually do not have, a dedicated mechanism to actually monitor or have oversight over the use and application of AI in that context. And of course, they've got now, a Center for Artificial Intelligence that has come up, and which shows traction in terms of how they intend to develop skill sets around the use and application of AI. Looking at countries like South Africa as well, there is POPIA, which is progressive because it does address the use of data and automated decision-making processes. and it makes much recommendation around that area. And what these policies do is that they effectively lay a foundation of trust, which is one of the major principles when we're looking at the use and deployment of AI technologies. We need people to be able to trust whatever is being deployed. We also need elements of safety when AI is being deployed. So having these pieces of legislation, which are broadly speaking addressing data protection, not necessarily focused on AI, it kind of does lay a foundation for trust and also bring in the safeguards for safety to a certain extent. So yes, there have been a number of interventions or piecemeal strategies that are in place, but not necessarily the national AI strategy that we would ideally want to see. So you find that countries like Malawi, for instance, they've got a digital economy strategy which addresses digital economy and whatever. It's like a one-stop, and it has also presented a 5-year plan of how the government wants to ensure that there's data protection, etc. But nothing really that is centered specifically on AI. So, but is it a strategy? Yes, it is a strategy because it's what government, right now, what we can say safely we are relying on. But is it the actual one-stop shop national AI strategy we're talking about? Look at India. India has a national artificial intelligence strategy developed in 2018, and it is a one-stop shop, and it kind of comprehensively addresses a whole lot of issues, including issues of trust building. It brings in how to also be, inclusive in terms of the consultative processes that happen around AI use and application. So you find that within that, it's actually something that is more progressive comparatively when looking at the African continent and what strides have been taken. So yeah, I think the principles have also been emphasized. I know UNESCO has come up with a recommendation on AI ethics, and it outlines a number of principles, including safety, inclusion, trustworthy, trust building, and things like that. And it's very critical. And from a regional perspective, looking at our own, I like talking about homegrown solutions. And looking at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Resolution 473, it has kind of like, opened up, this conversation of having a robust one-stop shop, comprehensive legislation and policy on artificial intelligence, robotics and imaging technology use and application. So what that recommendation has been, or what that resolution from the African Commission has prescribed, is for countries in Africa to actually, or African states rather, to be able to sit down and think properly about what safeguards can be put to human rights approaches to the use and application of AI, and has prescribed that states should actually take an active role in this. And among other things, of course, the African Commission has also embarked on a study, looking forward to hoping that very soon they'll be able to release those findings in terms of the study that they've engaged on to see what they've discovered. But generally, I think it's also an area that in civil society we can be able to check with our governments to what extent they have begun to actually comply with this resolution that has been presented by the African Commission to actually come up with comprehensive legislation, comprehensive policies that address this key issue. So I think I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Not many countries have AI, or rather dedicated AI strategies. So it would be really good to know if there are countries that have dedicated AI legislation, or do they just rely on other legislation that touch on AI. So over to you.
Thank you.
I don't know whether you'll be successful with because
I'm
it seems
fine
not to.
I'm fine without it, I think. Can you hear me at the back? So, like I mentioned, I'm Tara and I work at Alt Advisory in South Africa. We are a team of lawyers and researchers and technologists that are grappling with questions concerning the intersect of law and technology. We recently completed a research series with assistance from CEPESA and the ADRF that focused on answering 2 questions. So the first was, what instruments currently exist in Africa that are governing AI? And second, can we use existing laws in South Africa to understand how AI is being used in South Africa and how they're using our data? A more honest framing of those questions is what is actually happening in governance in Africa at all, and what on earth is happening with my data. So we know there's been some continental progress, like she mentioned, a working group with blueprint, the AU resolution, but our research was interested in understanding what was happening at a domestic level. So we did a high-level mapping of the 55 countries in Africa to try and work out what governance mechanisms currently exist. And this is what we found. So I'm going to read it because there's nothing more embarrassing than misquoting your own statistics. But out of the 55 countries, none had dedicated AI legislation. So Mauritius does have partial legislation at the moment. So in 2021, their Financial Services Commission issued some rules around robotics and AI in the investment and portfolio management services. So it's quite a niche and very narrow scope that it applies to. 4 countries have a national AI strategy. So these include Egypt, Morocco, Sierra Leone, and again, Mauritius coming up strong. Tunisia is the only country with a draft policy on AI, and there are only a handful of countries that include AI in their national development plans. We did see a rise in number with task forces or commissions. So 13 out of the 55 countries have established some sort of body to deal with AI issues. This seems to be an area that's gaining quite a lot of traction in terms of AI governance, and we think it might be the first step on any country's kind of AI governance journey. But where we saw the biggest governance measure was through data protection legislation. So 38 countries have data protection laws. That includes those that are also in draft form. And out of those, 30 provide data subjects with rights against automated processing. So of course there's nuance in terms of the actual wording of that right and how much protection that affords in terms of automated processing. But it's the most prevalent form of governance at the moment. So in short, for that research, we found there's not a lot of regulation currently. The major takeaway for us was that the rhetoric doesn't quite match the regulation. So we hear a lot from, and sadly and also aptly, it's called failure to access. So we used our rights of access that are provided in data protection laws and in our freedom of information laws to try and get the answers to that question. So we submitted access to information requests to 14 different companies. We focused on the insurance, e-commerce, and retail sectors. And then we also submitted 2 requests to public bodies. So we submitted one to the Department of Health and one to the Department of Home Affairs. We chose them because we know they're processing a lot of our data, and we were interested in the Department of Health's response based on the increased amount of data they were collecting during COVID. So we asked all of the entities 5 questions, and they focused on understanding what information they had about us and how they used AI for data profiling. And this is what we found. So nearly a third of the companies didn't respond at all, which is classic. I'm sure everyone has similar issues with their access to information rights. And only about half provided any substantive responses to the questions about AI. So the responses in general were incredibly vague, sometimes maddeningly confusing, just bizarrely drafted responses, and at times just demonstrated a complete lack of engagement with the technical and legal elements of our questions. So one request we made, someone transferred us to their fraud department and then to their internal human resources department. So the research was bizarre at times. The sectors that we assume are using AI, which is mostly banks, e-commerce, and insurance, confirmed mostly that they were using AI, but they provided absolutely no kind of meaningful information about how it was being used. So we have no idea if a profile about us was created and if it was used and what any of those consequences were. So basically, our finding was that existing laws in South Africa didn't help us understand how AI is being used at all, which is obviously makes any oversight really difficult, if not impossible, because without this information, it's really difficult for anyone to exercise or protect their right not to be subjected to automated decision making. And in light of our finding from our previous report, which is that the most prevalent form of governance over AI is coming from data protection law, makes that finding quite concerning. So our major takeaway is that we need to bolster existing legal mechanisms, particularly in data protection law, so that they can play an effective role in the oversight and governance of artificial intelligence. Again, an exciting opportunity for all of us to ensure that the future of AI is human rights based. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. And it's actually quite concerning that you did all that to try and access information, but that was incredibly difficult. And this reminds me of conversations that we've had throughout these last 2 days on how companies should inculcate the culture of proactive disclosure and make it easy for us to access information from them. Now I'll move over to Risper from Lawyers Hub, and for her, she's going to take us through, just to continue the conversation that has been had, actual use cases for AI and specifically in electoral processes. So we're curious to know, Risper, who uses AI in electoral processes? Is it our electoral commissions? Is it the candidates, the political candidates? Is it us, the voters? So please go ahead. Let me know if you would need this.
No. Let's continue with the trend
Okay.
and see who's awake. I think one of the challenges with this last session, it's a lot, right? So I'm curious to hear, what have you had so far? Just for my own personal pleasure. Has anyone had anything?
Yes. The step is the one not doing anything. So
At the back, guys at the back. Okay, we'll start there.
And that's the technologists, just the overall understanding is that technologists have a long way to go in terms of making citizens understand what AI is.
Interesting. There was a hand there.
Yeah, issues of surveillance and
Yeah. Last one? Yes.
There is a need for a framework or strategy that addresses AI in the region.
Great. I think you've taken note that I'm a teacher by profession, but a lawyer by, papers. But yes, and I'm going to bounce off what Tara has said. Just trying to really unpack how AI is actually being reflected in the African continent is actually not the easiest of tasks, right? So we have what we deduce from, what is happening, but one of the conversations we were having as we are preparing for this session is really there isn't much research around its use, around its impact, around, we're having a lot of movement towards policy, and of course, if we were to look at the GDPR and how that had a ripple effect on data protection in Kenya automatically, I think also with AI, we are having the EU coming up with its act, and it's being seen as, again, it's going to be seen as one of the, having the impact that the GDPR had, which is now forcing everyone else to be like, whoa, okay, what do we do with AI? How do we regulate it? So that's one of the things that I'm finding that is being a conversation builder. But in terms of its use, I think we are still having a long way to go to just be able to put that information out there. And even if just by a way of polling, how many lawyers or people in the legal profession do we have in the room? How many techies do we have in the room? Yeah, I feel like that is such a
if you own a
disproportion.
mobile smartphone,
No. I know cracking a joke is our ICT practitioners bill would make you a techie and an ICT practitioner, but no, that's not what you're trying to do. So I think the conversation is also it's disproportionate, right? Because we need both stakeholders in the room to be able to understand the technicalities of AI, even as we are trying to have conversations around policy, right? But looking at the use cases, and my panel has done a great job in just trying to put together some of the scenarios we're seeing in the continent. Digital lending is a big one, right? So we are finding a lot of use, a lot of activity happening in that regard, and even in the Kenyan context, it has had a lot of conversation around how to monitor how they're going about getting the approving loans and knowing, who is going to get what, how they're sharing this data, with whom they're sharing this data, how they're able to even connect with your contacts, because that was a whole thing that was happening in the past 2 years, just before we got the regulations and the guidelines to kind of monitor their activity. And so now they're being forced to register so that we are able to kind of regulate how they go about their conduct. So that is one of the primary use cases we are finding. In the healthcare space, it's also very alive. In the agricultural space, we're getting a lot of use for it, and even in the transport scenario. So a good example will be Uber movement. And the funny thing about most of these things is you find that it comes up with a buzz, but then it goes silent. So the Uber movement, for instance, started with a whole buzz, right? Where they were trying to put together the tracking of movement to be able to kind of give one data analytics, of course, and then also be able to predict, which streets are busy, how. Just trying to put together a whole system whereby the government could now be able to use this information to help with our transport environment within different countries. But now again, if you try to look up that information online, you won't get so much on it. So you wonder, where did all that go? Where did the buzz and the frenzy go to? Where did it die down to? And so now one of the other areas we are now seeing a buzz, of course, is with our elections. We've always had, I think the general feel about elections across the continent is fraud, right? What else do we associate with elections? Uncertainty, apprehension. So either everything spikes or everything is just, we are waiting for elections to be over. So that was Kenya last month. We were just all waiting for the 9th of August to come and go, and then the week thereafter to come and go, and then now we can all be like, we are back. So you tell anyone, can we have a meeting? They're like, after the elections, So that is usually the thing that we attach to our election season. But now we are having the technological developments happening, and that means the use of AI also now trying to be integrated into our electioneering processes. And I think some of the highlights that I could probably give, which my fellow panelists have already mentioned, will be the different aspects that I've seen it playing the more general basis of it, because I don't think we have gotten to what the West, for instance, have gotten to in how they conduct their elections. And so one of the ways we found it playing out will be, of course, the three primary ways in which elections are conducted. So there is the voter registration, there is the counting, the tallying, the results, and then and so when it comes to voter registration, I think this dates back to 2013 when we first had our what we call the KIEMS kit, which is the biometric voter registration happening. So in 2013 it was a complete fail, and obviously that could connote to it being a first instance. The issue of skills, which is something we're probably going to be hearing a lot on. Electricity, we've been having conversations around connectivity and accessibility. So that is some of the things I think they didn't factor at that particular instance. But then the same was also done in 2017, and from the reports that were coming out, it was a better performance. And now in 2022, actually, we had very few cases of the KIEMS kit not working or not functioning. And even in the instances where they did not function, there was a bit, it took about half a day delay, and then they were able to now also be onboarded. And so there are very few instances of manual voting happening, which I think is progress. If you're looking back to the two previous elections and what happened in August, then that is definitely progress and in the right direction. And so that was one of the issues about manual registration was, having dead voters or not being very certain about who has been onboarded, who is coming into the polling station and all. And so this system allows that element of transparency, which I think we are fronting with the use of technology, moving from a place of doubt and frustration, and then moving to a place where there is doubt. So the other thing that I'll probably want to highlight was now the tail end of our electioneering process, which is tallying and putting together the votes. So let me just unpack this. So once we voted on the 9th of August 2022, and the system that was adopted for this particular election is once the officer at the polling station has, they've counted the results, they've put it down on it's Form 34A for the Kenyans in the room. Form 34A, which is the initial, the polling station tallying sheet, right? So once that was put in there, they were able to take a photo of that and then be able to transmit that through a portal, which is then automatically shared with the national tally, right? So everything was being, the picture was being taken, and all of that is there. And then also, for the Kenyans as citizens, we had access to the IEBC portal. IEBC is the Independent and Election Boundaries Commission. And so we all had access to their portal, and you're able to see all the forms as they're being uploaded and as everyone is putting in their results. So we had different stakeholders trying to tally the votes. So we had our media guys doing their own votes and tallying. So a joke that was happening was we have, for instance, we have NTV and we have KTN, we have Citizen as TV and media stations. So people were like, if you want to see candidate A winning, go to TV station 1. If you want to see candidate B winning, go to TV station 2. If you want to make sure the other person is losing who you don't want to win, go to TV station. Because all of them were tallying, and I guess they started at different, we don't know. We have no visibility of how they were doing their tallying, but they all had different guys winning, right? At different periods in time. And so that is what was happening. And so in terms of transparency, and then we also had the political personnel or the different political parties, they were also doing their tallies. And so when you go on social media, people are congratulating others before the IEBC has made the official announcement. So based on their tallying and based on their results, they're able to be like, so-and-so has won in so-and-so constituency. But then at the end of the day, when IEBC, for instance, was giving the final result, you find that that person who was announced as a winner on Twitter actually lost, or another who lost actually won. So I'll get to that later on, but in this sense, I wanted to talk about that element of having the results put out in the tallying. As I was reading, I came across, is there any Ghanaian in the room? So it's in one of the elections, there was the opposition, and then of course the incumbent. So the opposition got an IT expert who came together with a data analytics system to try and be able to tabulate the results at the specific polling stations as they were rolling out, and then be able to put together the results. So what they did is they mobilized people in all the polling centers across the nation, and anytime their pink form, which is our form 34A, was coming out, they already captured that information, and they had the system whereby it's not just a picture, but it was being scanned, such that upon scanning, the system is able to identify the numerics or whatever, and be able to translate that into data, feed the system, and then there's an automatic regeneration of the results as it was ongoing, which is not the case that happened in Kenya. Because in Kenya, it was just a photo. I'm sharing with you a photo. So you still have to go as the ITS expert and now download the photo, read the results, and then input and all that. And so I think that is probably where we need to go. The next step that needs to be taken, but at least it has happened in one of the African countries, and it was a success story because they actually were able to share the final results, and it was concurrent with the electoral commission. And so we saw that we ran the Africa Low Tech Festival, which I think many are usually familiar with that. It tries to bring together different stakeholders and just host conversations around emerging issues in legal and tech around the continent. And this year we were focusing on AI, building an AI dialogue between Europe and Africa and seeing how the two can be collaborators. And in running that, we had the hackathon. And one of the guys who won the hackathon actually came up with this particular product where they were very frustrated with our election system. And so they put together a product that tries to now tabulate and also release, and there's transparency. So it's very ironic that that was one of the winners during our festival in June, and then in August we are having a somewhat replica or something that is purporting to be a similar product, but it was clearly it wasn't feasible. And then lastly, I think AI plays out very clearly in content and social media use, which is now what I was alluding to earlier. So we had all these conversations going on. So as soon as IBC started putting out polls and putting out the forms on their portal, everyone, of course, started getting momentum. We are all IT experts and we know how to count. So everyone was saying, do you have a calculator? Go ahead, get us the president. And so everyone was putting out content on their social media platforms, which could, which ended up being very misleading information, because it's not verified, you don't know who the source is, you don't know where it's originating from, and we had different people with different interests putting out content. So that period between 9th and the week, because it was a whole week before we actually had the official results, that period was rampant. Like our Twitter, our Facebook, and our WhatsApp mainly were heavily flooded with misinformation, whereby everyone is pushing their narrative, pushing their own interests. And I think now that's how we find AI playing out, whereby, for instance, the use of chatbots. And I'll give an example of where we had the BBI case happening in Kenya again. And with that, we had political influencers or political, I'm not trying to say parties, but people with those political interest in the different sides of the BBI, putting out these automated accounts, to be able to push their narratives and push their agenda online. And so that created a whole thing, a whole conversation around, who are you engaging with online, and is what you're seeing actually coming from a human, who's expressing themselves, or it's just someone hiding behind an account trying to push a narrative to you so that you identify with their position. And I think this has been replicated even with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, right? So this is another instance where this was done, where there was the use of, they are amassing all this data, and then they start pushing narratives to you that now force you to conform to their opinion, or be influenced by what they're saying, so that you move or are directed in a certain position. So that is what we had a lot happening. I could direct you to Mozilla. They did a report on the same, and also especially on TikTok. We also had a lot of happenings around that particular platform, and this was with the use of deep fakes, whereby a good one was where we had the former President Obama presenting our now President Ruto with a portrait, and it was like he was endorsing, and they will actually take it and be like, oh, okay, so let me cast my vote for this person. If you're an Obama fan, you'll be like, here's a great endorsement, right? There was also another one on Ronaldinho. I think that is a footballer, right, guys? Yes. So he was on the other hand of the spectrum, he was endorsing Raila, but he came out rightly, and he put out on a tweet that that's not the case. So, but you see, using these different things and different videos, where we are having the adaptations of someone's voice being used in a video, being seen to be saying something, that has never happened or they have never been a part of. All this were happening in all our spaces, and it's very easily to get a certain narrative out there or influence people in a particular way, and it's done very quickly. Okay, so those are the main ways in which we saw AI playing out within the elections this past August. And I think the risks that are raised, as much as the beauties of it, where there's a lot of access, I will believe. There's a lot of access. You're able to see, the different dynamics, the different things that are playing out. There's a lot of transparency. One of the things, though this is still a debate that's ongoing, is that these were one of the most transparent and fair elections that we have had in Kenya. So usually there is the joke. If you know Raila Odinga was one of the guys who are contesting for the seat. How many of us know Raila Odinga? Yeah, he's lost a number of times. So he's run for presidency quite a number of times, and he's lost a number of times. And this was one of the times again that he lost. But this time, even most of his supporters, like even back home, they were like, this time it wasn't stolen. This time it was just other issues, but it wasn't theft. And that is because of how it appeared that a lot of the information was out there. People were able to interact with the data as it was coming, the results and all that. And so that was, that's a good thing. But then the risks that are coming with this is, one, we have that limited skill, as we pointed out earlier in the poll. having lawyers, not having IT people in the room, there's that skills gap, yeah? And then there's also the challenge with data. Just how much data do we have at the local level even to be able to unpack all the dynamics of AI and all the dynamics of putting together products and coming up with, with this, with things that are actually helpful and focused on us as communities. And then lastly will be the issue of regulation, which I think we have raised quite effectively. Are they sufficient? Is having a Data Protection Act enough? Yeah, and even in its form, is it sufficient even in its form in trying to take care of all the data? Because AI is data heavy. So are our data protection legislations even sufficient to be able to take care of all the needs that come with having different people having your data being collected, where it's being stored, and all that? So those are some of the questions and the risks that are being raised. But I think in terms of pushing this narrative forward, I think the discussion is being had. There's the argument that AI is the least of our problems, but I really don't think so, because it's penetrating all the different aspects of our lives faster than we think, right? And so I think that's how I'd conclude it, that the discussion is being had and is alive, and we need to engage even more to be able to make sure we are making it protective for us. Yeah.
Thank you, Risper, for that wonderful recap of the electoral process and its relevance with regards to AI. We have just 30 minutes to go, and I know we have a number of questions from the audience, so I'll ask a final round of questions, and we can take around give or take 12 minutes on that, and then so that we have 15 minutes for the questions from the audience. So I'll start with Shabnam. Interestingly, before what you do now, you used to develop AI for CSOs, right? And so just following up to your, yes. Yes, so as a follow-up to your very interesting conversation around the deployment and the development of AI, what are some of the considerations as we're developing AI for CSOs?
Okay, so just to rephrase what Wakesho said, I am a lawyer. I don't program anything. I was part of a team that was developing AI for war crimes investigations, and specifically for Syria. So just I wanted to follow up because Risper talked really eloquently about kind of a specific use case of artificial intelligence in Kenya, and kind of the benefits and risks that were posed there. And I know that up until that conversation, we had been talking about we were very risk heavy, right? Because there are a lot of human rights challenges. But with every AI, with every sector, there's a positive and negative use case, right? Like for elections, for example, you can have the use of AI for manipulation of opinions, and we saw a lot of that. Companies doing that and manipulating elections, manipulating people's sentiments. In the United States, in the UK during Brexit, these tools were used in Africa. And then, for persons with disabilities, where bias in AI can cause a lot of harm when people who are developing the AI aren't accounting for people with different needs and different abilities. But then also, these systems can be used to benefit persons with disabilities by giving them access to technologies and tools that make life easier and more possible day to day. So just wanted to talk about, in my previous role, working on Syria, where there was just so much documentation coming out of the Syrian conflict. We're seeing it again in Ukraine, just tons of videos being recorded with smartphones, video cameras, posted online, downloaded, reposted, shared widely among people, and then used for human rights investigations and war crimes investigations. And so what we tried to do was develop an AI tool using computer vision, deep learning technologies to make to automate the clustering and deduplication of videos, so that instead of taking maybe 10 years for a human to analyze all of those things, it could take only a year. So cutting down on the time for analysis and making the process of investigations more efficient. And so just some of the considerations we had. One, privacy by design, which encouraged the tech sector to follow. They don't usually, but it was a consideration of ours. A lot of these videos were showing faces of humans, victims of violence, and they never consented to their videos being taken in the first place. They were in the middle of a tragedy, and they were being recorded, and granted it was being recorded to show what was happening to them to the world, but there was never a consent process there. And so now we were taking these videos that were filmed by journalists and human rights activists and using it to create an AI system. So we were very careful. We never wanted the AI system to be able to identify specific faces. And we designed specifically with that in mind. Second, co-design, inclusive design. How did they want this design? And then keeping them in the loop about the entire process, asking them for feedback along the way, and iterating and redesigning to meet their needs. Because they were the ones who were going to use this at the end of the day, and it was for them. It was for their justice process. And then three, digital literacy. So when we were working on this, one, in the GitHub repo where all of this was stored, it was, we included plain language. A lot of times you go on GitHub and you read through stuff and it's like, no one can understand what they're really talking about. We tried to make it as simple as possible, explaining how this thing was developed, how it was tested. And then also, anytime we work with civil society groups, we weren't talking about, oh, this is why you should use the tool, da-da-da-da. The first thing that we did, we spent 30 minutes, an hour, however long it took, to explain what is AI? What are the benefits and risks? How was this developed, and kind of leave room for questions and answers. And then we moved to the implementation phase. And so that was part of our process. I'm not saying we are perfect. There's always unintended risks that come up, but considerations that we had when we were developing this thing. And we hope, that it will come to use and that it has been beneficial to groups.
Thank you, Shabnam. Just again to go back to Thobekile and linking to the research that was presented by Tara, done by the Alt Advisory, it's actually quite interesting that just 4 out of all the countries recognized by the African Union as African countries have national AI strategies. Egypt, Mauritius, Morocco, and Sierra Leone. And so this shows that there's definitely a lot of room for improvement and a lot of room for just applying the right parameters to the development of AI strategies. So Thobekile, what are the key recommendations that you have for developing AI strategies?
All right, thank you very much. And I like the Alt Advisory research as well, and it kind of also emphasizes that there is actually no comprehensive single strategy. No organization that has one comprehensive national AI strategy, but there's one country, I think you mentioned, Tara, with a draft that is in place. So I think the recommendation definitely is going towards that direction, that we need countries to be able to come up with comprehensive national AI strategies that actually address the use and application of AI. And just to take a poll, actually, I don't know, Tara, from the forward list, what's number 1? Because for me, I think I'll zero in on Mauritius, and I'll explain why. Because of course, I think in terms of the data protection governance or data governance, they are actually doing very well, and I think that is what we need at the very least to ensure that people are safe. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Mauritius as well is probably the leading star on this front.
I should just have the microphone because I was actually going to you next. So looking at what you have already done, what would you say are the key focus areas as you move along for the future? Because
are you probably going to look at, like you mentioned, Mauritius, are these countries that have some form of AI strategy or some form of legislation touching on AI? Are those the ones that have probably deployed AI for good use, for example? So just what are you planning to do?
Thanks. Yeah. So our focus is to try and understand the substance of the instruments that currently exist, so we can pull out some trends that are coming through from the continent, and then compare them to trends in the global north to see what's going on with governments, and then make some suggestions on how to improve it or what works or what doesn't work. So that will be our focus.
Oh, okay. Simple and to the point. We'll open it up to the floor.
Yes, because we just have a few minutes left now. So please, by show of hands. A lot. We can start at the back, coming to the front. The very back, yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm Jimmy from the Uganda Police. The issue of developing strategies for artificial intelligence and different policies is a very good discussion in the House. But I also wanted us to appreciate that artificial intelligence has been with us for many years. And that's been around, has been used either without us knowing or not knowing. And the discussion has always been, is there surveillance by state actors on probably people? I want to know, in terms of the policies and so on, where you are drawing the difference in the use of artificial intelligence in production vis-a-vis the use of artificial intelligence for destruction, and where is the balance in this? Because at the end of the day, it still remains a double-edged sword. Many people are using it for their research. Many are using it even for managing platforms. What we are talking about, the use of avatars that now are being used to detect authentic behaviors and so on. But where do you draw the balance, especially from our side in law enforcement? Because our work is many times to enforce the law. We don't question the law. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Daniel. I'm Zambian. I get a story about Raila Odinga. He's my friend, so I'll let you know what you say about him. Just
No, just tell him I'm his daughter. Just mention
Okay, yeah. So I'm joking about it. I'm just trying to find out about what you think could have been the role of AI literacy when it comes to dealing with the challenges that AI is posing across the continent. I know that many people are talking about the law. I know the law is useful, but sometimes the chaotic nature and hectic pace of the technology is moving. Could sometimes render the law not irrelevant, but difficult to actually implement. So to what extent does the panel believe that massive AI literacy could help to solve some of the challenges we're facing at the moment?
Thank you. In the middle. So yes.
Okay, I'm Frederick. I have a question for her. For you. You mentioned something about how AI could have been possibly used in the election where, I don't know if it's Ronaldinho's or something. Yeah, so those things actually happen. They can impersonate someone else using AI. And if you don't know much about AI, even if you know, sometimes it's very difficult to know that whether this is real or this is not, because you actually feel this looks like an actual person and they're able to speak and making all those movements. So after that had happened, you said Kenya, right?
Yes.
What measures have been taken after that, or has anything been done?
I think you know the answer to that. But I know.
Okay. We just shout out to Frederick. He was one of our students at the Digital Rights School that was held right here on Monday. So I can see that you're really taking this seriously.
Yes.
Yeah, so my question is more to do with our control in terms of AI, because I know that Africa as a continent mostly imports technologies. We're not really at the forefront of creating technologies. So it becomes a little bit difficult to even understand the programming behind what we're using. Reverse engineering is not really our forte and things like that. And I don't really think that the Silicon Valley and these creators of these, technologies that we use even in our banking system and other institutions, I don't think we really have that muscle where we can say, okay, custom make this technology this way, or else we won't use it. So now my question is really, how do we bridge that gap? Is it that we simply have to go our own way as Africa and, have more programmers so that we create our own programs, or is there somewhere we can bridge the gap between where we're trying to go and where we are? Because obviously there's going to be this middle path, in the next few years before our AI policies are created, where we'll have to sort of transition out of these programs that are not so human rights compliant. So I just want to see the panel's view of that.
So we'll take Diana, Catherine, and Florence, and then we'll now come to this side. So they'll answer, and then we'll come to this side. Diana.
Okay. Thank you for a very wonderful discussion. Not so sure if my question fits from what the discussions have been, but just drawing from talking about the negative and the positive impacts of AI. My question is around how can we coexist with machines that lack human values? Can we teach AI human values? Is it possible? I'm not so sure if that question fits into this discussion, but I think that's just my general question, especially when we talk about AI and, very clearly having had the positives, and yes, we do agree that there's the positives to AI, but like at the same time, there's the negatives to it, and also maybe just tied to that, how can we prevent just further marginalization by AI for groups that are already marginalized?
My question is to Vanity from ICNL. I don't want to sound very technical, but I've always been wondering about one thing and I just want to ask. I work on content moderation, and I've always wondered if it takes, like, the AI goes hand in hand with machine learning, to my understanding, and maybe it would take some time to train, maybe let's say a data set to do the content moderation, right? So my question is, in Kenya we have this one thing where the language always changes and what we want, or then everything always changes, the languages keep changing. And I've always wondered, is there, because like this AI takes so long, like can it really be used to like moderate things that change so fast? So I think that's just my question. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks to the panel, a lot to digest. A question maybe for Thobekile. Looking at the gaps that we have identified on the lack or inadequacy of strategies governing AI, what role do you see for civil society? Because the conversation I'm hearing is the state is leading, efforts, that tech companies are involved, but then what is civil society doing? Or what do you think, what opportunities should we leverage as civil society to influence? Should we be looking at least where there is expertise, should we be having sort of some expertise as regional hubs that can come up with model frameworks tailored to our contextual, regional contextual needs and realities?
Okay, thank you. So we'll take these questions first, and Shabnam, you can address the specific question to you on whether AI can moderate content that changes so fast, alongside Diana's question on how do we coexist with machines that lack human values, and how do we prevent further marginalization. Rachel, please, you can handle the question that was specifically directed to you by Frederick. There are two questions, Frederick, and yes, the gentleman on the far left. And then Thobekile, what role do you see for civil society in this entire conversation? Tara, also, you can also address the issue of the balance. Where are we drawing the balance? Between the use of AI for production and the AI destruction, and then how do we bridge that gap? That's an excellent question around, we can't control AI, with regards to, issues like reverse engineering not being our forte, so how do we then bridge that gap? And of course, feel free to weigh in on any of those questions. Yeah. we can start to begin.
Okay, thank you so much. I think civil society has a very critical role in this conversation because for government to be able to deploy any action or to come up with any policy, it has to engage in consultative processes, and civil society is part of that voice, putting our voice forward. And civil society as well has been pivotal in coming up with research. Already we've heard what Advisory has been doing, and I think it's a critical role for us as civil society to also ensure that also we link up as well with academia and come up with robust strategies, or rather research outputs and findings that will be able to best inform the type of policies that are developed in our countries, the type of strategies that are developed. I will say for a fact that right now, as an example, the regulator in Zimbabwe has put out a call for researchers to kind of delve into these issues and come up with where we are as a country in Zimbabwe with regards to AI. And definitely that was a space I'm hoping that a good number of civil society actors will submitted proposals to be able to take up this work and offer their capacities as well. And you find that government as well are lacking in terms of capacity. They are still trying to understand what is this AI, as much as they will come in panels and talk positively about these mechanisms they put in place, and civil society will be in the space, possibly inwardly rolling eyes and wondering, really, are you really doing this? I'll say for a fact, for instance, that I was at a UNESCO, AI conference, and trust me, the representation of civil society was most worrying, because the voice that was in that room was mostly government, and there was no one to counter that narrative that was coming from government. So I think, speaking the truth to power, I'm one big on that. I believe that if there are any gaps, we need to flag them out and not sugarcoat things the way they are. And also highlight the fact that there is need as well for us as civil society actors also to not act in silos. I think some of these conversations, even us as civil society organizations, we might not even have the relevant capacity. We need technologies. We need to be able to better understand and appreciate AI as well. So I think there's need for collaboration across sectors, and I think that's something that we can do, and that's the space we can occupy.
Okay, so values. I think that I would actually push back on your question a bit. One, we already coexist with technology, and for a lot of us, our phones are just an extension of our hands. We carry it everywhere, rely on it for so much. And two, on the values question, I would say that we already impart values into these systems. We're already coding in our values by what data we're choosing to input, how we're choosing to label by we I mean the collective we, a society as a whole, how we're choosing to label that data. And if our values are based in segregation and discrimination, then those values will be represented in the outputs of these systems. Just one example, I could give so many examples of this in the United States, but let's say with credit loans, so loans and banks based on your credit score and other information about you. So much of U.S. history was based on discriminatory housing policies and bank decisions that were based on racism. And so there was just a lot of the data that is being used in these systems are based on these historical injustices, and that's being reflected. And then what happens is they say, well, it's not us, it's the machine, and so you can hide behind the machine and say it's not us deciding. This is all automated. And if you're not understanding how those automated systems are created, then you can just nod along and say, yeah, okay, well, it must be me then. The machine can't be discriminating against me. And so that's just something we can code, we can design our values into these systems, and they're being designed with our values currently, depending on what the values of the designers are. And then in terms of content moderation, yeah, that's a tricky one. I'm not quite sure how to answer. I mean, because these tech companies are based primarily in the United States and some in Europe, you see that they're very, very good at English and European languages, and that's kind of the data they're relying upon. You know, when we were trying to develop some AI tools, or not develop, but use AI tools that had been developed for Arabic handwriting, we saw that it was bad. It was like 5% accuracy, which is, you could flip a coin and it would be better than that. And so, and this is a little bit of a different issue, but in terms of the investment that tech companies put into other languages, it's really disproportionate. And it's not even an AI issue, honestly. Like, they have content moderators, like they have rooms full of content moderators sitting in Berlin, in Germany, kind of going through this content and flagging it manually. It's not all happening through automated systems. It's a mix. And so are people here being hired, trained to do this type of work? I would probably guess the investment is a lot lower, though I don't have any statistics to back that up. So I can't fully answer your question because I don't have a lot of the data, but that's just my initial reflection.
Thank you. So thank you for your question. It's a great one. And in South Africa recently, we appointed a commission to look into whether or not there was racial bias in health insurance payouts. And one of the biggest findings from that commission was that the company who was being investigated could not provide any answers about how those decisions were made because they had just bought the system from a company overseas and they had absolutely no idea how it was making the decisions. So it's a very real problem that we're facing. I'm not entirely sure what the solution is. I think procurement laws could play a potential useful role in that. So if you build in requirements to stipulate the kinds of systems that you can buy and ensuring that they undergo some sort of human rights impact assessment before you do that. So that's kind of a space that you can look at in terms of those kinds of regulations. In terms of the, does that answer your question?
Yes, I think it does, to some extent.
I think also that there's a lot more tech capability in Africa, and I think we will get to a point where we don't then always have to rely on the global north to develop things. We're definitely seeing it in South Africa and various different countries, which is also a solution, I think. The question about the double-edged sword, I'm not entirely sure I understood the question. Was it about how do we ensure in our governance mechanisms that we're allowing enough space for AI to kind of develop and innovate and not blocking it, but also ensuring human rights? Again, great question, a tricky one. I think the arguments for allowing AI to not be regulated because it's so innovative are outdated, and I think we've proven that they're clearly wrong. It was often used as a rhetoric to kind of undermine initiatives to regulate AI responses. And I think that in the governance mechanisms that we build, we can take account of that. So we acknowledge that often we're not entirely sure what the consequences of an AI system will be, and so in any initiatives like a human rights impact assessment, for example, they ensure that built into that is the kind of unknowing consequences that could exist. So doing things like assessing it before it's deployed, assessing it after deployment, but then also assessing it 10 years after deployment is a really good way to ensure that we take account of that iterative nature of AI and also ensure the consequences are accounted for. You look confused. Does that answer your question?
So for me, with regard to literacy, I believe literacy always, right? So it's very hard to address something that you do not understand or you have no knowledge of. And so one of the steps or the recommendations that we have gotten across all the different sessions we've gone to is the issue of training. We always have to keep empowering ourselves, and also as CSOs now moving to empower the people that we are relating to. However, the flip of the coin is we are still also dealing with hunger. AI is this big thing that to what we call Mama Boga or Wanjiro, not the basic person on the ground, the ultimate user, right? They're not really concerned to the greater extent of all the technicalities that are attached to AI. However, they are still affected by it, right? And so we still need to involve them in this conversation where we are not disregarding that they have the issues that we still need to address as a society or at the continental level or even at our national levels. But also we are not saying that AI is still too far away from Africa and we do not need to address it, because that is false. So that is how I would look at the issue of literacy. So an example would be in Kenya, there is the coding curriculum that has been rolled out. How far it will go and what impact it will have is something we are yet to see. But I think that is some of the steps that we can begin to make. We are having 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds now coding and just doing amazing stuff online, and that is not something we can disregard. But how do we make sure that the 5-year-olds across the continent are having these skills, and it's not just a result of the privileged 5-year-olds? So I think we should continue to push for the skills to be equipped at all our capacities, but also make sure this is inclusive and not just a result of the field. And then when it comes to the footballer and whether any measures were taken, so I'll answer this in a general kind of form. When the cases of misinformation were now heightening because of the trickling in of the results and all, we had, for instance, Twitter coming up with a tab whereby if someone, for instance, was very influential, or if a tweet is going out and it's putting out results or purporting to give a particular narrative, Twitter was allowing for a tag to go with that tweet where it was reading, this is unverified information, go to IEBC portal to get the results of the actual information and all. So that is one of the ways we saw a sort of response. But then we also had a lot of reaction and engagement from different stakeholders, so the CSOs, ourselves, the lawyers we had a lot of people coming in quickly to have conversations around misinformation, disinformation, so that people are aware that actually, guys, there could be false information that you're interacting with, be careful. So that is another thing that was happening. And then lastly, we had, I think this was a really good thing, we had fact-checking organizations and systems really coming alive. So the likes of Africana, they were really doing a good job in making sure that people are very well informed and having the correct information in terms of engagement, because it was really heightened at that particular point. So I think those are some of the measures that actually helped during that time. But I think we would have loved to see even the IEBC participating in making sure hate speech, misinformation is not being pushed, because before that there was a statement that went out that they were collaborating with an organization to kind of come up with a portal to make sure they're able to check out on the issues of hate speech and all. But during that period, we did not see that come alive. There was no information coming from the IBC or that sort of engagement. So that would have been nice to see.
Thank you. So let's just take the two. There were two last questions. 3, 4. Okay, let's keep it 30 seconds. Because
Guys, when they said you need to be awake, I wasn't that.
Let's start with Brenda. So Brenda?
So everyone is chasing us out of the
Okay, so yes, Brenda, please, thank you for being here voluntarily. We'll only take 5 minutes after this. Yes, Brenda.
Yes, no problem. So, welcome to Zambia, all of you. I'm sure when you came through the airport, you found a structure built by China. And then when you came through the roads, you found surveillance cameras, I think, rolled out on the streets. So I just want to ask a question. What do you think is the role of China in Africa in relation to AI?
Thank you.
Thanks. Levi here from ISOC Zambia. For me, I think the question is simple. Elon Musk, one of the leading AI, who runs one of the leading AI companies, right, has the most existential threat across human race than nuclear weapons. So in trying to develop policies, because I think there's a two-way, depending on who is driving the agenda, AI is more skewed to it. Recently, I think there was a case where I think about 4 AI robots were involved in killing, I think more than 15 people who were involved in a military AI lab of some sort. So my question is, how then do we develop policies that are going to cater human rights? Because depending on who is running the AI agenda, most of the policies are likely to drive it, whether good or bad. And then in conclusion, I think with regard to teaching AI values, it is possible, but with regard to them accurately interpreting emotions, that's far-fetched. It's not really likely going to happen. That's my take.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be listening to this conversation. I think AI is something as an Africans we need to focus on. I want to focus on the side of the entrepreneurship when it comes to AI, because despite the projection that has been made, the success that has been made in AI, something that we notice is like entrepreneurs are left behind because AI adaptation is not automatic, and something that is the SMEs who are already struggling in this process have to also now get to learn how AI works. So my question is, what are the attention that policymakers have given to SMEs, and as well as the characteristics, if at all they exist, what are the kind of attention that they have given to SMEs as a social enterprise grant that are small, and as well as what are the characteristics that exist so that small SMEs can actually know, because sometimes it happens in the internet, they don't know what is happening, they just see that this is happening and then they just move ahead and it affects their businesses. What are the characteristics that exist when it comes to AI that entrepreneurs or small SMEs that they need to look up to or they need to look forward to?
Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Levi Kapungwe. I am a dev. I just want to know about AI. This one. Deaf people are not aware about AI. How can deaf people have access to this information? Because we have seen that many programs, they only teach, but there is no sign language interpreters. How can deaf people receive this information?
Thank you. I don't think there's any other question that is left. So for this one, I will not designate any particular question to any of you. So just pick whatever you feel comfortable responding to. So of course, there's a question around AI and how we are disseminating this information to deaf persons and in general persons with disabilities. The role of China in Africa in relation to AI. And then how do we develop policies to cater for AI? Looking into, of course, the context of the threats that AI is posing. And then finally, on entrepreneurs and SMEs, as well as social enterprises, what attention is given to them, and how do they know what is going on, and what should they look forward to? So just give it a go at any of the questions or all of the questions. If we can take a minute each, it would be perfect.
Okay, I'll talk about China, right? what are China's intentions in Zambia? I have no idea. But in relation to surveillance technologies, my question is, as a Zambian citizen, are you aware of why there are surveillance technologies deployed everywhere across your city? Because as individuals, we need to know, we need to be able to question this and interrogate this with our governments to say, okay, if you're deploying surveillance technologies, why? If you're procuring them from whichever country you're procuring them, why? And if you are, offering this, putting this technology everywhere, who have you consulted? And who has also been part of this conversation? I think in Zimbabwe we have a similar challenge where we have this thing. And I think definitely we share China in common, I must say. I think there's a space for civil society. I will speak heavily on civil society's perspective that there's a room for us to interrogate procurement processes of surveillance technologies to be able to fully appreciate why this is being deployed, because there are definitely repercussions for human rights defenders, for civil society actors that are calling out the government, and particularly myself as a human rights defender in my country, I really am concerned about deployment of surveillance technologies everywhere. So we need to be able to question why things are being procured like that from China or from wherever, Israel as an example. Yeah, just to cite some common, not criminals, but common.
These were very hard questions, guys, I'll just be honest. But in relation to entrepreneurship and SMEs, I definitely think this continues to be a tug of war. And if you look at even in different facets, so the issue of, for instance, startups. In Kenya, when the startup bill came, it was a point of contention because of the narrative. It was just adding bureaucracy, it was just adding like hindrances to already guys were trying to set up. And then when you look at ICT practitioners bill as well in Kenya, it had the same narrative where it was burdening the people as opposed to trying to push for innovation and push for that development. And I think SMEs also, they're grappling with the same, and it's the same difficulty that is being that's emanating from AI and its regulation and its use. And I would put it in these two ways. One would be the skills gap, and two would also be the lack of data sets, for instance. Do they have access to all the things that AI requires for you to be able to, for example, take your business to the next level? So I think one would be to have conversations and see how we can be able, like I was saying, to have a very inclusive end product that doesn't make someone who's trying to get up or someone who's not even gotten up be unable to do so. So I think that is how I'd address it, because I haven't seen very many instances of success. What I've seen is more and more reports and more assessments just raising the issue of the gap that AI could potentially even worsen the divide that's already existing between different factions of people. And so that is what I've come across, and it's definitely a discussion we need to have a bit more.
I will take your question. Thank you. Thank you for pointing it out. I think it's something that we need to be always aware of, and to make our resources as inclusive as possible. I don't have the solution. I think that it requires efforts from everyone to be more cognizant of disabilities that exist and to make information as accessible to all as possible. I'm sure that's quite a dissatisfying answer, but I hope going forward people will bear it in mind. I will when I put out my resources. So thank you for bringing it to attention.
So in terms of emotions, to some extent, yes, I was talking about values, not necessarily emotions, but there are efforts to develop AI that interprets emotions. That has been done. One, again, every time you talk about anything, it's the good and the negative, right? The negative is for marketing and ads. So you read someone's emotion and then the ad changes based on that emotion. I mean, it's like an interactive live ad. It's really creepy. And then there's reading emotions for people with sight impairments, so that there's like a headset, and then it reads to them like not just what's happening around them, but also what are the emotions on people's faces, so that they have a more holistic picture of what's going on. There's the creepy side, there's the beneficial side, it's all of it. You also had a question about regulation.
Yes, because regulation try to strike a balance between the most threats that are imminent, because AI, in as much as it is more beneficial, it's also causing threats on one end.
And I think that goes into the previous question as well about the benefits and the destructive impacts. And I just, to answer the question, I want to give two separate examples of regulation. One from the draft EU AI Act, and then one from Brazil. The draft EU AI Act has very clear standards. So this is what is this is a definition of a high-risk system, this is a definition of a medium-risk system, and this is a definition of low-risk system. And these are the factors, these are all the factors that go into determining is something high risk or how to evaluate the risk of that system, right? Let's go to Brazil. Brazil, they wanted to make a regulation that was very lenient, like just allowed for any sort of AI. It was very like business friendly. And they basically said regulators will determine if there's a risk. And if there's a risk, the company has to do, or the AI system manager has to do X, Y, Z, which was all very like minimal, very small things that they had to do, right? And so how can you understand what's a risk, what's not a risk? It just, one, it allows for a lot of arbitrary enforcement, and then two, it puts a lot of burden on regulators to figure out what they're even supposed to be doing. And so it doesn't really make sense. So I think being as clear as possible in the legislation when you're assigning like risk factors is very important there. And then for people with disabilities and the deaf community, absolutely, I would argue that conversation needs to be happening with the communities to understand how, because I'm sitting here, I don't know the best way to serve your communities, right? We need to be talking to each other, learning from each other. The organization I used to work for was developing technologies for people with sight and learning impairments, and very much co-designing with that community to get them the tools they need to be able to read books in so many different languages. And it's not just about the deaf community, it's also about localizing resources with language in mind and with the background knowledge. Like not everyone is going to be very educated or super educated on these topics, so simplifying it as much as possible.
Thank you, Shabnam, and I love that we finished it off at that collaboration and working together to develop solutions. So thank you so much. We have come to an end of our panel discussion today. So two questions before I wrap it up, because I know we'll walk away. One, there was a missing phone. If you've lost your phone, it's at the reception. If you hear anyone who's looking for their phone, there was one that was found and is at the reception. And then two, after this, please let's all go to the dome for the closing session. So I want us, and this is actually the very last session of FIFAfrica22, so thank you so much for literally sitting to the very end. So a round of applause to all of you. That is one. And then the other thing also is because of, this was a very engaging discussion, so a round of applause for all of those excellent questions and interactions. And then to our panelists, Thobekile, Shabnam, Tara, and Risper, a round of applause to all of them for the excellent work that they have done. They prepared, they read, they interacted with us, offered solutions, so good job to all of you. And I also want us to recognize our sign language interpreters today. I think they have done an excellent job. I was looking at that end when I was saying words like, when we were saying words like reverse engineering and surveillance. So I was actually just very keen to see what those words were going to look like, right? So you guys have done amazing. So make this a very, very heavy round of applause. Thank you. That's a wrap. See you next year for 2023.